A few years back, I came across the maintenance logs of a regional taxi fleet in Osaka, a company running 42 vehicles around the clock, 7 days a week. The average mileage across that fleet when the logs were compiled, 812,000 miles. Average annual mechanical repair cost per vehicle, under $600. I read those numbers 3 times because I thought it was a translation error. It wasn't. The mechanics maintaining those vehicles weren't using special engines. They weren't running on exotic oil or factory-sealed power units. They were driving ordinary production cars. Same platforms you'd find in any parking lot. Maintained on a set of habits so simple, they cost nothing at all. Habits that were printed in every owner's manual before 1990. And then quietly removed, not because they stopped working, because they worked too well. The average driver scraps a car at around 150,000 miles, not because the engine is physically done, because wear accumulates in patterns that are entirely preventable. Nobody explained what causes them, and the cost of fixing them eventually exceeds what the car's worth. Somewhere in the 1990s, owner's manuals got thinner. Maintenance intervals got longer, not because engines needed less care, but because lower maintenance costs looked better in advertising. The detailed protocols that used to occupy the first 20 pages of every owner's manual, specific, careful, habit-forming instructions written by engineers who'd actually studied wear patterns over decades, got condensed into a single page of warnings. The automotive repair industry generates over $300 billion a year globally. Much of that revenue depends on wear patterns that are, if you know what you're doing, almost entirely optional. The Osaka mechanics knew what they were doing. They'd learned from older mechanics, who'd learned from older mechanics still, in a chain of knowledge that traced back to protocols that Detroit and Toyota both printed in the 1970s and then quietly stopped printing. I'm going to show you exactly what those protocols are. And I want to be real with you, the parts list for this video is nothing. There is no parts list. Everything I'm about to show you costs $0 and takes under 2 minutes per habit. Here's what the fleet logs actually show. 5 habits. All of them cost nothing. None of them take more than 2 minutes, and together, they're the reason those vehicles are still running at mileages most people consider physically impossible. Let me walk you through each one. The first habit is called in the old fleet manuals, at least the cold start protocol. And the version most modern drivers run looks like this. You start the engine, let it idle for 15 or 20 seconds because you vaguely remember that being a thing, and then you drive normally. Fleet mechanics do something different. They drive slowly, genuinely slowly, under 20 miles per hour for the first full mile after a cold start, every time, without exception. Here's why it matters. You already know this from something completely unrelated. If you've ever tried to pour cold honey out of a jar, you know it doesn't flow, it sits there. Warm the jar slightly and it pours immediately. Engine oil does the same thing. At 40 degrees Fahrenheit, motor oil is viscous enough that it takes nearly 60 seconds to fully coat every surface in the engine. At 20 degrees, it can take 2 minutes or more. During that window, metal slides on metal with no protective film between them. Every bit of hard acceleration in the first mile of a cold start produces wear that would not happen if you simply drove gently. Not forever. 1 mile, 2 minutes, 0 cost. A 2003 Toyota Camry in the fleet logs 220,000 miles at the time, had cylinder wall measurements still within factory spec. The mechanic's notes mentioned the cold start protocol had been followed religiously since the car was new. That car eventually turned 340,000 miles on the same engine block. The cold start protocol was the first entry in the maintenance checklist. Every single service record for 12 years. The 1978 Toyota Corolla Owner's Manual had 4 lines dedicated to cold start driving behavior. The 2005 Corolla Manual has none. The second habit is one I find genuinely fascinating because the problem it solves is almost completely invisible to the average driver. It was standard practice until the late 1980s, and it was removed from owner's manuals around 1991, not by accident, but because the shift in how people use cars made it seem irrelevant. It wasn't. Here's the issue. Every time you drive less than 10 minutes to the grocery store, to drop the kids at school, into town, and back, your engine never reaches full operating temperature. Which means the moisture that condenses inside a cold engine never fully evaporates. And unburned fuel that seeps past the rings never gets cooked off. Over time, this moisture and fuel contaminate your oil. They create an acidic mixture that eats bearing surfaces and cylinder walls from the inside, slowly, invisibly, across tens of thousands of miles. The chemistry is identical to what happens when you leave standing water in a cast iron pan. You know that orange rust that appears overnight? That same process, quieter and hidden inside the engine, is running continuously in any car that only makes short trips. The Osaka Fleet Purge protocol is simple, and it's not unique to Osaka. Fleet operators running large vehicle pools in Germany in the 1970s had a version of the same protocol they called the Ausbrennen, the burnout run. British taxi operators called it the long run. Different names, same principle. Once a week, every vehicle gets a minimum 20-minute continuous highway run. Not city driving with stops and starts. Steady-state highway driving at full operating temperature, long enough for the oil to heat up completely and drive off any accumulated moisture and fuel contamination. 20 minutes, zero cost. And the difference it makes to bearing wear over 200,000 miles is, by the fleet data, significant. The short-trip vehicles in the same fleet, the ones that hadn't been put on the rotation for a weekly highway run, showed accelerated bearing wear detectable by around 60,000 miles. The ones running the purge protocol didn't. Same oil change intervals, different outcome. Third habit, and this is the one that runs most directly against the instinct every modern driver has developed. After any hard driving, after a highway run, after climbing a long grade, after pulling away from traffic at pace, the fleet protocol calls for an idle down. 60 seconds of gentle idling before the engine is switched off. Modern drivers don't do this. You park, you switch off, you go inside. Pre-1985 owner's manuals, including the original Toyota Corolla manual from 1979 and the Datsun 280Z manual from 1978, specifically instructed drivers to idle the engine for one full day, minute after hard use before switching off. That instruction disappeared from manuals as turbocharged engines fell out of fashion in mass-market cars, and as emission standards pushed manufacturers toward immediate cold stop protocols. But here's why that instruction existed, and why it still matters even in naturally aspirated engines. When you switch off a hot engine, oil circulation stops immediately. The oil sitting in the hottest zones around turbo bearings, if you have them, in the oil galleries near the cylinder head, gets trapped at temperature with no cooling flow, and it cooks. Over time, that cooked oil becomes varnish. Varnish builds in oil passages. Oil pressure drops. Bearing surfaces go unprotected. 1 minute of idling before shutdown lets the pump continue circulating oil and coolant through the engine's hottest zones, dropping temperatures to a safe range before everything goes still. The fleet mechanic's shorthand for this was written on a laminated card in every vehicle. Drive hard, idle long. Cost, nothing. Time, 60 seconds. Fourth, and this one is about tires, but not in the way you'd expect. Most drivers know they're supposed to check tire pressure. Almost no driver knows that when you check, it matters as much as how often. The fleet protocol is specific. Tire pressure is checked cold, in the morning, before the vehicle has moved more than 1 mile. That specificity isn't arbitrary. Driving heats the air inside your tires. A tire that's been on the highway for 20 minutes reads 3 to 4 psi higher than its actual cold pressure, which means a driver checking tires after even a short drive and finding the reading at spec is almost certainly underinflated in reality. You already know this reaction. You've seen it your whole life and just never connected the dots. It's the same reason a sealed plastic bottle feels soft when it comes out of the fridge and slightly firm after sitting in the sun. The gas inside expands with heat. Consistently underinflated tires wear from the inside edge outward. They run hotter. They load the wheel bearings unevenly. And they cut fuel economy by as much as 3% per psi below spec, which compounds across hundreds of thousands of miles into real additional engine load and wear. Fleet protocol: cold, morning, every week, every vehicle. Takes 90 seconds, costs nothing. And this last one is the one that surprises most people, because almost every driver who genuinely cares about their car does the exact opposite of what the fleet mechanics do. When you top off oil, or coolant, or brake fluid, the instinct is to fill it to the maximum mark. Full is good, more is better. That instinct is wrong, and it was corrected explicitly in owner's manuals before 1990. Overfilling engine oil causes a specific and almost invisible failure mode. When the oil level sits above the safe range, the crankshaft rotating it up to 3,000 RPM begins to contact the oil surface. Instead of the oil pump delivering a pressurized film to the bearings, the crankshaft beats the oil into foam. Foam doesn't lubricate. Foam collapses under load and leaves bearing surfaces momentarily unprotected. And the damage happens silently, while the pressure gauge reads completely normal because the pump is still moving fluid. It's just circulating foam. The fleet protocol: midpoint between minimum and maximum on the dipstick. Not at max, not close to max. Midpoint, and always check with a cold engine before adding anything. Not after a drive while oil is still hot and drawn up from the sump and giving you a false reading. Cold engine, cold oil, midpoint on the dipstick. The same principle applies to coolant. The expansion tank has a minimum and maximum mark for a reason. Overfilling coolant causes pressure buildup that stresses hoses and the radiator cap, and it can push coolant out of the system at exactly the moment you need it. Midpoint on every fluid. That was in every owner's manual before 1990. It's barely mentioned now. None of these habits, by itself, gets you to 800,000 miles. It's the compound effect. The cold start protocol protects the cylinder walls when the engine is most vulnerable. That keeps compression healthy. Healthy compression means the weekly purge run burns cleanly, so the oil stays uncontaminated longer. Clean oil means the idle down shutdown doesn't leave varnish building in the passages. The fleet operators didn't discover one trick. They maintained one system, every part supporting every other part. That's what the owner's manual used to teach. That's what was removed. And I want to be real with you. If your engine already has bearing wear, carbon buildup, or oil passage varnishing, these habits won't reverse it. What they will do is stop the progression and protect what's still working. Think of them as preservation, not restoration. And if you're starting with a car that's already at high mileage with unknown service history, they're still worth doing. You just shouldn't expect them to undo damage that's already there. Here's the part that keeps sitting with me. These 5 habits take a combined 6 minutes per week. They cost nothing. They were written in full in owner's manuals that shipped with every family car through the 1970s and into the 1980s. And an entire generation of drivers grew up without them. Not because the knowledge was lost, but because somewhere in the shift from owner-maintained cars to service-dependent cars, the industry realized that a driver who knows how to protect their own engine doesn't need to come back every 30,000 miles with a failing one. That 42-vehicle fleet in Osaka, the mechanics who kept those cars running past 800,000 miles, they learned from written protocols, from manuals, from older mechanics who'd read and memorized those manuals. That chain of knowledge is still intact. It just needs someone to pass it along. I don't know what brought you here. Maybe your car's getting older and you're wondering how much further it can go. Maybe you just bought something used and want to understand what it'll take to keep it on the road. Maybe you found this completely by accident and none of that applies. Doesn't matter. It works either way. Now you know how. Knowledge like this doesn't disappear on its own. It gets buried. This channel digs it back up. Subscribe if that matters to you. Take care and I'll see you in the next.